It's 1983. It's the rise of the independent publishers, and something on this list that hasn't happened for 43 years. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. Check the description of this video for links to my eBay store, my email, my Instagram, and my whatnot. And before we get started, I'd like to share something that has some import for people in the comic book community. A really great guy, a fellow New Yorker, Brandon from Mon Comics. If you've seen his videos, you may be familiar, but you may not be familiar with the news that he recently suffered a devastating house fire. Fortunately, Brandon and his wife and kids and his pets are fine, but there was, I think the house was almost a complete loss. A total loss, including his comic book collection. So there are folks that are funding a GoFundMe. I'm going to put the description, in the description, I'm going to put the link to that GoFundMe. So if you want to, you can contribute. Really great guy, and help him get through this difficult period. So we're going to do the CGC population report count. We count down the top 10. Then we also look at the top 10 for DC and Marvel, as well as other books, top books from independent publishers. And I'm also going to highlight any book that has more copies than the 10th book for DC or Marvel, whichever is lowest. Other keys, other high-value books. So we have a lot to get through because there are a lot of independent publishers coming into the fore here in 1983. And I kind of make a subtle distinction between an independent comic, which is something, and there are a few examples of that we see ongoing, where it's really a passion project, self-published, whether it's Aardvark Vanaheim, Warp Graphics, Harvey Pekar, versus independent publishers. Publishers, they're trying to put together, give creators the rights to their books, which we're seeing in the 80s, that are not DC and Marvel. And then there are also the other ones like Archie. But I should note that 1983 does not have any Harvey books on the list, because Harvey Comics, Richie Rich, Casper the Ghost, Wendy the Witch, they ceased publication in 1982. They would come back, but many of their books would end up in later years being under other publishers, including like Marvel Star Comics. Anyway, let's get started. We count down the top 10. We're going to start our list at number 10, and the 10th book on the list is Uncanny X-Men, number 171. This is the one where Rogue joins the X-Men. Chris Claremont and Walt Simonson. Simonson did the cover. Welcome to the X-Men, Rogue. We hope you survived the experience. This is the point in time, not as bad as some of her early appearances where Rogue looks like a middle-aged woman. At any rate, this book, Uncanny X-Men, popular, Rogue popular, 1,900 copies on the census. Number 9 on the list is Thor, number 338, Walt Simonson, story, cover, and art. This is the second appearance of Beta Ray Bill. This great storyline from 1983. We will touch upon this a little bit more in just a few minutes. Number 9 on the list, 2,244 copies. At number 8 on the list is Batman, number 357. This is the first appearance of Jason Todd, second cameo appearance of Killer Croc. There are a lot of very small Killer Croc keys around this time in Batman and Detective. Jerry Conway did the story. Don Newton and Alfredo Alcala did the art. Ed Hannigan and Dick Giordano did the cover. Jason Todd, the second Robin, and we did, I don't know, now I'm confused for a moment. No, I don't think it would be until the following year. Yes, he doesn't become the Robin just yet. So some of that's going to play out in the future. DC, of course, just 2 years away from Crisis on Infinite Earth, so a lot will be changing over there. And, Killer Croc, who became kind of a mainstay of Batman's Rogues Gallery at this time, This book has 2,515 copies on the census. At number 7 on the list is Amazing Spider-Man number 239, Roger Stern, John Romita Jr. Romita Jr. and Al Milgrom did the cover. This is the second appearance of Hobgoblin. It's the first Spider-Man versus Hobgoblin battle. Talk more about that in just a moment. 3,230. The number 6 book on the list is kind of a TV spec deal, a book that got bolstered by the TV series. This is Star Wars number 68. It's the first appearance of the planet Mandalore, which of course gave birth to the Mandalorian. And that all of that lore around the character. When the Mandalorian series was hot during the comic boom, this book became pretty big. Dave Michelini did the story. Gene Day did the cover, and with Tom Palmer did the interior art. So, yeah, this book exploded during the comic boom. And this is that point in time where Star Wars is kind of telling more or less non-canonical stories. Marvel just went out on their own without really running stuff necessarily past Lucasfilm in terms of what would be the canon that built around the Star Wars universe. So, but again, Star Wars was a popular title. It goes past the comic books, and it is valued by collectors. There are a lot of people who like to put the whole thing together because it is reasonable with just over 100 issues. 4,484 copies on the census. Number 5 on the list is Alpha Flight number 1 by John Byrne. Byrne and Terry Austin doing the cover. This is the first appearance of 2 of the members of Alpha Flight, Puck and Marina. And it tells the origin of Alpha Flight. And of course, you know, they needed sales, so let's just throw Spidey on the cover as well as the FF and the Avengers. John Byrne was Canadian. He co-created the Alpha Flight in X-Men number 120 and 121 with Chris Claremont. And being Canadian, he kind of felt, I guess, obligated to go and take this book off on its own. And he didn't stay with it for that long. I think, like a year or so? Eventually, the series did run 130 issues, but it was a big seller at the time. And it's one of those books that was such a big seller at the time that in the secondary market now, there are plenty of copies out there. So the supply kind of keeps pace with the demand. There aren't a whole lot of big keys in here. And now Flight number 1 is not a huge book. It's not the first appearance of the team. There are 4,648 copies on the census. Number 4 on the list is New Mutants number 1. Second appearance of the New Mutants after the Marvel graphic novel number 4, Chris Claremont and Bob McLeod. And this series ran for 100 issues. There are several keys in here. It was adapted into that kind of buried movie. It starred Anya Taylor-Joy and others that kind of highlighted this early team, the core of this team. But it was set to be released, and then COVID happened, and the release kept getting delayed, and finally was put out in streaming and kind of took all the wind out of it. It wasn't a bad film, and it wasn't part of the MCU or wasn't part of the Fox universe. So it was kind of like, you know, I think people would have wanted it to be connected to the X-Men proper, but of course that was going away as Warner was buying, as Disney was buying Fox. I'm getting confused because Warner Brothers is going to be purchased by Universal now. God knows. Any rate, New Mutants number 1, 5,274 copies on the census. Now, the top 3 are quite a bit away from number 4, and they're all very close together. At number 3 on the list is Thor 337, the first appearance of Beta Ray Bill by Walt Simonson. Classic cover, a character that was a huge deal at the time, right? This was like a tectonic shift for Thor comic books at the time. And Simonson just hit on something. We haven't seen Beta Ray Bill other than his profile in Thor Ragnarok. Will he be coming to the MCU? That could really help the value of this book and the popularity of this book. Again, I don't talk too much about value in the CGC population report videos because it's more about, there is a correlation between the number of books that have been graded and the value, and, except for books that are very rare, and we will talk about those as we get down on the list, and when there aren't that many copies available. But this kind of revitalized Thor. I'm actually surprised because I don't think Thor was selling as well as some other titles at the time, but it does have 10,324 copies on the census. And we're talking about 450 copies between numbers 1 and number 3. At number 2 on the list, and there maybe should be an asterisk here because I only do blue label copies. I don't worry about the other color, and in most cases, it's not that big a deal. As we get at this point in time, there are more graded books. It doesn't make that huge a difference. We're past the Marvel value stamp era, but this book is quite different in that regard. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 238, the first appearance of the Hobgoblin, Roger Stern story. John Romita Sr. and Jr., this classic cover. They also did the interior art. And you can see there in the bottom right-hand corner, bonus feature, free lakeside skin tattoos inside. That kind of thing where, you know, water and you can get the temporary tattoos. Kids will put whatever. Even as a kid, I was never a tattoo guy. So this book, there were a couple things. It was a cardboard insert that went around the top staple. And then these tattoos were inserted, I think it was in the back of the book. A lot of books are missing them. So if the tattoos, either the entire insert or what was put inside the cardboard is missing, this gets a green qualified label. And I only go with blue labels. So really, maybe this should be number 1, but I'm going to stick with the rule I've been using all along. And that was kind of, I think, what kept Incredible Hulk 181 out of the top list. And also probably keeps people from submitting this book if it's missing the tattoos. Like, they don't want the green label. They'd rather keep it raw. There are a lot of books, because there were a few other books that came out the same month that also had the tattoos, like Fantastic Four. I think it was what would it be, like 252 or some 254, the one with the landscape cover. So people will swap-a-roo them. And also, because of that cardboard in there, it causes more stress around the top staple, and it's harder to press. It'll, you know, maybe it can leave some indentations, especially depending on how long it's been sitting there like that, which does make it more difficult to get a 9.8. Still, this book has value in grades under 9.8. The total number of copies on the census is 10,501. If you add in the qualified books, is 1,897. That would put it well into first. But the other thing to remember is some of those books have been CPR'd. And not always do folks send back the labels. So that's number 2 on the list. Number 1 on the list. And I said something that we haven't seen in 43 years. Not since 1960 has the number 1 spot on the list gone to a DC book. And that is Omega Men number 3. The first appearance of Lobo. This book driven by the speculation and then the announcement that Jason Momoa would be playing Lobo in the new DC universe. He is set to appear in the Supergirl TV show. Roger Silfer did the story. Keith Giffen and Mike DiCarlo did the cover and art. And I just want to see Jason Momoa suit up as Lobo, at least at the beginning of the film, in a comic-accurate costume like he's wearing here. Because that would be ridiculous, and actually might be something that would happen in James Gunn's DCU. Of the books in the top 10 also, this has the highest mean grade at 9.42. The book probably isn't worth quite as much as, let's say, ASM 238, grade for grade. So it's not going to be as submitted in lower grades. But the other thing that puts it into higher grade on average is that it was printed on Baxter paper. This was a direct-only book. There were no newsstand copies of Omega Men number 3. Omega Men, they had first appeared in Green Lantern, and then they had a great role in a awesome Teen Titans story. And then they got their own book. And this kind of stands alone. It's a book that's not difficult to find because Omega Men coming out of that new Teen Titans story arc were quite popular. And there were quite a number of collectors, again, not on the newsstand, but collectors that bought, like myself, that bought this book. And that Baxter paper is whiter, it's thicker, so the book holds up a little bit better over time. And since there are no newsstands, there were no books that were kind of mistreated as newsstands. So it does have that high mean grade. The total number of copies on the census is 10,775. Now let's journey outside the top 10. Let's go to the 9th book for Marvel, and this is Marvel Tales number 1, featuring Peter Porker, the spectacular Spider-Ham. First appearance of Peter Porker. I think it's also the appearance of like Hulk Bunny, Captain America, and Goose Rider. Tom DeFalco did the story. Mark Armstrong and Joe Albello did the art. And Steve Mellor did the cover art. Again, movies promoting this. Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Ham, voiced by John Mulaney, really increased the popularity of this book because, not for nothing, but 1980s Funny Animal, well, I should take that back. For a long time, Funny Animal books didn't do that well. There are exceptions. We'll talk about that later. There are 1,871 copies on the census. The third DC book on the list is New Teen Titans Annual Number 2, the first appearance of the second vigilante, Adrian Chase, not to be confused with the Golden Age Cowboy. Marv Wolfman, George Perez. George Perez paying homage to the cover from Amazing Spider-Man 129. This book, again, driven by TV, Vigilante is in the Peacemaker TV series. That has really pushed the popularity of this book. Vigilante was not an enormous character, and it was kind of forgotten to the dustbin of history. He's very, very 80s character. This book does have a total number of 1,534 copies on the census. The 10th Marvel book on the list is Uncanny X-Men number 168, Chris Claremont and Paul Smith. This is the first appearance of the adult Madeline Pryor, who this book again got pushed by popularity of the X-Men 97 animated series. X-Men's always going to be collectible. It's one of those things like I have books that have value and I only cull them from collections I buy. I don't seek them out at shows because I do have a good part of the run, but I try to get them in high grade. This has 1,402 copies on the census. We're going to go to another publisher, and it's pretty early for one. This is Eagle Comics. Judge Dredd number 1, John Wagner story, Brian Boland cover and art, and it's the first U.S. appearance of Judge Dredd. This particular book ran for 33 issues under Eagle Comics and then 2 more issues under Quality Comics. These are reprints of UK books. The Judge Dredd made his first appearance in 2000 AD number 2, a UK magazine in 1977 by John Wagner and Carlos Ezquerra, where this is kind of one of those post-apocalyptic stories. So Mega City 1 is basically the entire eastern seaboard, and the law enforcement have the powers of both basically judge, jury, and executioner, right? So he arrests potential criminals, he tries them himself, and then he is the law. So these books were reprints of the original UK stories. There have been 2 movies made of Judge Dredd, one starring Sylvester Stallone in 1995, and another one which I haven't seen starring Carl Urban in 2012. This comes in with 1,401 copies on the census. Let's keep going. 4th DC book is Brave and the Bold number 200, the final issue of the series, because this has a preview of Batman and the Outsiders, and then Batman and the Outsiders came out the next month. It's first appearance of the Outsiders, which means it's the first appearance of 3 new members, Halo, Geoforce, and Katana. Katana probably, at this point, the most prominent. She did appear in that first Suicide Squad film. Mike W. Barr did the story. Dave Gibbons and Gary Martin did the art. Jim Aparo did the cover and the interior art on the Outsider story. The one thing that's difficult about this book in grade is that these DC Anniversary books from this time period, there are a handful of them. They have this kind of it's not really foil. It's like kind of like a golden. I'm trying to think of the right word to describe what you see in the trade dress where it says Anniversary Issue 200 in the background of the Batman logos. It's kind of golden. You can see tarnish in there over time. But this book, 984 copies in the census. The 5th DC book on the list is Batman number 366. This is the first appearance of Jason Todd in the Robin costume. Of course, you get a great Joker cover by Walt Simonson. Doug mentioned the story. Don Newton, and Alfredo Alcala did the art. So I think the Jason Todd keenness, and then bolstered a little bit by a Joker cover. This book has 973 copies on the census. The 6th DC book, and this is kind of an indication DC hasn't quite gotten their legs under them yet. like they might a little bit later in the 1980s. The sixth DC book is Frank Miller's Ronin #1, Miller's story and art. Lynn Varney also contributed coloring, I believe. So this was a 6-issue series where a Japanese Ronin is reincarnated in a post-apocalyptic dystopian future New York City. This was heavily solicited at the time, heavily advertised, and heavily disappointing. I don't think it met the expectations of readers, and that was exacerbated by the fact that the books came out about once every 6 months, making the Camelot 3000 schedule look rapid in comparison. The Miller did do a follow-up series several years ago. I think it's just that it's Frank Miller art, which is going to hold the popularity of this book. There are 831 copies on the census. The top book from Pacific Comics is Alien Worlds #4, Dave Stevens cover. That's all you need to know. This is from Pacific Comics, and now we're going to see this is Dave Stevens entering the most productive, I guess, part of his career where he was putting out the most work. And after the documentary a few years ago, we talked about Dave Stevens passed away early, so we're not getting any more Dave Stevens work. And he worked primarily for these independent publishers. So the print runs on the books that he did do the cover are fairly low. I think the only cover he did for DC, Elvira's House of Mystery. He did some interior artwork on some Who's Who issues, but people love the Dave Stevens, and again, great artist, popularity promoted by the documentary. This has 745 copies on the census. The next book on the list is another Marvel book. This is a pretty big key. This is Blip #1. Steve Grant story, Bob Camp art. This is the first appearance in comic books of Mario and Donkey Kong. And of course, it's the first cover appearance of Matthew Laberto. Not Ali. He was a kid who, I don't know the extent of his acting career, but I think his biggest role, he was on Little House on the Prairie. Not a show I regularly watched. It might be in passing as my sister was watching it, but not something that I watched. So yeah, two iconic IPs in Donkey Kong and Mario, their first appearance. And this is a little bit harder book to find even for a Marvel book, by being this far down on the list, given its popularity, given its value. And Blip ran for 7 issues. None of the other issues have the same kind of value. 613 copies on the census. Let's go to the 7th DC book, and it is Vigilante #1, the origin of the Adrian Chase Vigilante. Marv Wolfman did the story. Keith Pollard did the cover and art. Interior inks by Dick Giordano. So Vigilante is a vigilante, right? He takes the law into his own hands, much like Punisher, right? His solo series ran for 50 issues. I think coming out of the Teen Titans, he was reasonably popular, and popular enough to hold his own series for 4 years. There are 612 copies on the census. Another Pacific Comics, and this is what we're talking about. We haven't finished the DC list, and this is very close to the first one. This is Alien Worlds #2, a Dave Stevens cover. Bruce Jones and Dave Stevens did the stories. Ken Stacy and Bruce Jones did the art. And of course, Dave Stevens did the cover as well as interior art. Kind of a harkening back to the early 1950s sci-fi kind of stuff. We talked about the popularity of Dave Stevens a minute ago. 576 copies on the census. The 8th DC book on the list is Masters of the Universe #3, the 3rd issue in the 3-issue miniseries. Paul Kupperberg did the story. George Tuska did the art. Klaus Janson inking the cover. It's, Masters of the Universe. This predates the Marvel Star Comics run. 573 copies on the census, which almost ties it with the 9th DC book on the list, which is Masters of the Universe #2. #1 was from 1982. Kupperberg and Tuska also worked on this with Klaus Janson inking the cover. And this is the origin of He-Man. Of course, these were based on the Mattel action figures. We went into a great detail on He-Man in last week's episode, so you can check that out if you're interested on more Master of the Universe. There is a movie coming out next year. We'll see how that is embraced by fandom. There are 571 copies in the census. Next book on the list is the top book from Comico. This is Grendel #1 by Matt Wagner. It's the origin of Hunter Rose, who was this version of Grendel. The Grendel is like a mantle that is passed down. Incredibly expensive and high grade. Again, these smaller publishers, smaller print counts, but especially for folks that were reading these books at the time, they are beloved because there's most of these characters. There's limited stories of them after the 1980s. He did crossovers with Batman and everything. There have been talks about movies, but nothing's really come to fruition. There are 512 copies on the census. Let's finish up DC. The 10th DC book is Batman number 359. First comic book work of Dan Jurgens, and it's the first cover appearance of Killer Croc, along with a whole bunch of other members of Batman's Rogues Gallery. Jerry Conway did the story. Dan Jurgens did the art, and Ed Hannigan did the cover. Dick Giordano inking both. There are 486 copies on the census. Let's go to the other publishers. First Comics, Star Slayer number 10 by John Ostrander, Leniel Del Sol, and Mike Gustovich. You no longer have Mike Grell doing the Star Slayer book, but there is a backup. It's the first full appearance of Grimjack. There were rumors a few years ago that the Russo brothers were going to be doing a Grimjack movie, but I think they're kind of busy for the next couple of years. So we'll see if that ever comes to fruition. And, especially if the Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars are as nearly as successful as Infinity War and Endgame, the Russo brothers will be in high demand. 263 copies on the census. From Megaton is Megaton number 1. This is the first professional published work of Eric Larson. He had self-published a book the previous year. Eric Larson and Butch Jackson art. Megaton ran for 8 issues. Small publisher that eventually folded. 128 copies in the census. The top book from Texas Comics is Justice Machine Annual number 1, which is the first appearance of the Elementals by Bill Willingham in a backup story. Bill Loebs, or William Messner Loebs, did the story. Bill Reinhold and Jeff D did the art. And Michael Golden did the cover. It also includes the Thunder Agents, the team created by Wally Wood for Tower Comics in the 1960s. The Elementals, created by Bill Willingham, would eventually get their own series with Comico. Justice Machine was published under Noble Comics from 81 to 83. Then you get this annual. They ended up going, I think they went to Comico as well. There were 2 volumes of Elementals book. One was 29 issues, one was 26 issues, with Willingham leading that the whole way through, I think. I think he did the whole thing. There are 125 copies on the census. From Capital Comics is Badger number 1 by Mike Barron and Jeff Butler. Steve Rude and Butler did the cover. This is the first appearance of the Badger, Norbert Sykes. It ran for 4 issues, and then it went to first with the Capital. And then it went to First Comics and ran for 70 issues, and then another 11 issues with Image. But I'm not sure what happened for issues 71 to 77. So Badger was like a mentally ill guy, and again, one of these characters that was very popular throughout the 80s in the independent publisher arena. 99 copies in the census. The top book from Warren is Vampirella number 12. This is the last Warren issue. So I guess this is the last time. I don't know if Warren was publishing anything else after this. Martin Hoffman did the cover. I think it's the last issue that makes this more popular than others. 72 copies on the census. I talked about Funny Animals. Here we go. Albedo, the prototype issue number 0 from Thoughts and Images. Steve Galacci did the story cover and art, and there are 3 versions of this. There's a white cover with a yellow desk, there's a white cover with a gray desk, and there's a blue cover with a gray desk. I don't know. I didn't make the rules. That's what it is. We will see issue number 2 potentially making the list in the future. What's the Galacci's character's name? Edna Felda? But really brought in we already had, Cerebus, but gave life to more, and you don't really call them funny animals because these are a little bit different. These are anthropomorphics. Marvel Tales is funny animals. They're animals who are like superheroes, but, they're much more in the tradition of, Walt Disney and Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and the Looney Tunes and, all those other funny animals, Woody Woodpecker and Fox and Crow and Peter Porkchops and Peter Panda, that, Super Duck for the Golden Age forward. This particular book, the first printing, 62 copies in the census, from Fantagraphics books, is Amazing Heroes number 35. Kevin Nolan cover of the Inferior 5, which really DC hadn't used them since the 1960s. There are 51 copies in the census. Top book from Whitman is Walt Disney's Comics and Stories number 500. I think at this point in time, Action and Detective were the only comics that were still running. And Archie didn't get to 500 at this point in time, did he? I don't think so. That were still running, that were at 500. This was only distributed in multi-packs. It's an anniversary issue, not a lot of other significance. 50 copies in the census. Speaking of Archie, the top book from Archie is Archie's Girls, Betty and Veronica, number 322. This is where Archie meets Cheryl Blossom. We talked about her in her first appearance in last week's episode. It might also be helped by having Betty and Veronica in their underwear. Don't ask me. Anyway, the 46 copies on the census. Top book from Charlton is Soap Opera Love number 1. They previously had Soap Opera Romances. I guess they wanted a number 1 out there. It lasted for 3 whole issues. Should a Jewish boy and an Irish girl fall in love? Beginning of this issue, the continuing story of David and Eileen. They must have watched. What was the TV show with Meredith Baxter and David Burney? Bridget Meets Bernie. Same idea. That was 1972, I think. Around there, early 70s. Lasted for 1 season. Was quite controversial on CBS TV. Look it up. 45 copies on the census. From Epic, which was a Marvel imprint, is Coyote number 1 by Steve Englehart and Steve Leahola. This book does have a couple of keys later on because of some early Todd McFarlane art. 44 copies on the census. The top book from Aardvark Vanaheim is Cerebus, the Aardvark, number 56. Dave Sims, story, cover, and art. A Wolveroach appearance, and interestingly, a Normal Man backup by Jim Valentino. Jim Valentino, one of the founders of Image, which I thought was kind of curious because I thought Normal Man was his best work. But who am I to say? Actually, a very funny series, one that I really enjoyed back in the day. Yeah, this is his first appearance. And maybe you should get a copy of this book. What do you think, folks? Let me know in the comments below. I might have a copy of this book somewhere as well. Anyway. Yeah, first appearance, Cerebus 56. You learn something new every day. 42 copies on the census. This is another book from Fantagraphics. We already had the fanzine. This is their first full comic book. It's actually a magazine. Love and Rockets number 2 by Gilbert and Jaime Hernandez. Jaime did the cover. Just a popular run that from an independent publisher with some really independent artists that were doing their own thing here. This has 36 copies on the census. The top book from Eclipse is DN Agents number 1, the origin and first appearance of the DN Agents. Mark Avanier did the story. Will Mugniot, and Al Gordon did the cover and art. There are 34 copies on the census. The top book from Street Enterprises is Comic Reader number 215 here. I don't see anything really all that interesting. Let me know if you know any better. 32 copies on the census. The top book from Red Circle, which is an Archie imprint that had their action heroes. This is The Fly number 1. The Fly has been around since the early Silver Age. There were 31 copies on the census. The top book from Kitchen Sink, interestingly enough, is not an adult book. It is The Spirit #1, Will Eisner cover, and reprinting old Spirit stories. I believe they're old stories. I don't think there were any new stories. This ran for 87 issues, and this, along with the smut, was like kind of the backbone of Kitchen Sink Press throughout the 1980s. 29 copies in the census. The top book from Warp Graphics is ElfQuest #15 by Wendy and Richard Pini. There are 24 copies in the census. The top book from Quadrant is Quadrant #1. You have a Peter Shue cover and art. I could kind of see why that's popular, and see a little bit more than that even. There are 20 copies in the census. Top book from Nostalgia World. This is an interesting one. It is The Legend of Bruce Lee #1. This ran for 2 issues, and it was reprints of newspaper strips. I'm not familiar with this at all, that were part of the LA Times syndicate. You get a photo cover of Bruce Lee here. I'm not really familiar with it. There are just 16 copies in the census. From Americomics, Bill Black's Americomics is Americomics Special #1, featuring the Sentinels of Justice. This was the only time we see the Sentinels of Justice, which are the Charlton action heroes. You got Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, Nightshade, and The Question. No Peacemaker, no Judo Master, no Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. I was going to say Asmodeus, but anyway. So Americomics did a lot of reprints, and they took a lot of public domain characters and wrote new stories about them. They also did a lot in that regard with good girl art in their books. But very shortly after this, DC acquired the rights to these Charlton characters, and they made their first appearance in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So this was it for the Sentinels of Justice. There are 14 copies in the census. The next book is, where are we? Is Hall of Fame, featuring the Thunder Agents #1 from JC Comics. Lou Manna and Rich Buckler cover. This is reprints of the Tower comics by Wally Wood from the 1960s, starring the Thunder Agents. This, do I have it here? I don't know exactly. It ran for 3 issues, all with reprints. There are 12 copies on the census. The top book from Quality over in the UK is Warrior #11, which has chapters of both Marvel Man, who, when he came over to America, became Miracle Man, and you see this Guy Fawkes mask with, because there is a chapter for Moore and Alan Moore and David Lloyd's V for Vendetta, which of course became a movie with Natalie Portman and Hugh Laurie and John Hurt. There are 11 copies on the census. Let's keep going. Top book from Harvey Pekar is American Splendor #8. 9 copies on the census. The top book from EC is Mad 242 with the Star Wars /A-Team cover. Also 9 copies on the census. The next book on the list has no publisher listed. This is Thorn Tales from the Lantern. No number. This is early work by Jeff Smith. And the way that it's listed, give me a moment. Nope. It collects Jeff Smith's cartoons from the Ohio State University newspaper, which I believe was entitled The Lantern. And of course, this bone cover. Just $1,000, 1,000 copies were produced by one account. I'm reading this from the Heritage Auction site because a 9.8 of this sold in 2020 now. Again, that's kind of pre-pandemic, early pandemic, but kind of pre-comic boom. I do just want to add this for context. For $13,200. This is well before the comic book came out. And this led to Bone, right? So basically, they were strips in the student-run newspaper, and this came out about the time he was like maybe 21 years old. So again, a very hard book to find. The top book from Joshua Quagmire, giggity, is Army Surplus Comics featuring Cutie Bunny #2, We talked about this more in detail with issue number 1 in last week's episode. There are 8 copies on the census. The top book from Ripoff Press is Fat Freddy's Comics and Stories, not Freddy's Cat. This is a takeoff, or a spin-off, I should say, of the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. This has 7 copies on the census. There's a tie. The 2 top books from Mattel are these inserts that were in their toys for Masters of the Universe. Masters of the Universe, The Clash of Arms, and Masters of the Universe, He-Man and the Insect People. Those both had 5 copies on the census. It tied it with the top book from Last Gasp, which is Weirdo number 7, which includes R. Crumb art, and Weirdo kind of parodying the Mad magazine of the 1950s with this border with all the faces in it. It was also done in, I think, early Crazies as well. This has 5 copies on the census. The top book from Visions, the magazine of Atlanta Fantasy Fair, is Visions number 5. 4 copies on the census. From Raw Books is Mouse, A Survivor's Tale, Chapter 4. These were inserts into the much larger, like, kind of treasury side Raw Books magazines. So the Mouse books are smaller than standard comic books. And, of course, these were all by Art Spiegelman and compiled into his groundbreaking graphic novel a few years later. There are 3 copies on the census. And that's going to tie it with Heavy Metal, number 70, the top book from HM Communications with this Joe Chiodo cover. And it's also going to tie it, and there's a little bit of an asterisk here as well, with Graphic Fantasy number 3 by Ajax Comics Group. This has early work by Eric Larson. There are, I guess, some signature series on here. I think there's 7 signed books and 3 blue labels of Graphic Fantasy, just with this early, I think it's Non-Savage Dragon, Eric Larson art. So that's going to do it for our list. Let me know what you think. Let me know how many books you have. I'd like to thank you all for stopping by. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other episodes here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.